The Prilorians and other aliens were terrified of the mere human Craig as he entered the Galactic Academy lecture hall door for the first day of his second year. But Craig would have to survive this year or face expulsion and disgrace for all humankind. Craig had just returned from Earth and reunited with his Prilorian roommate Kaid. But Kaid seemed uneasy, troubled. "Craig, footage of your insane feats surviving on that Deathworld leaked out over the summer break. The whole galaxy saw it. Everyone here, especially us Prilorians, feels threatened by how resilient and tough you humans are. I don't know what to think myself," Kaid said, fidgeting with his tentacles nervously. As they entered Alien Cultures class, the whispers and stares from alien classmates bored into Craig. The Prilorian professor singled him out immediately. "Does a mere human really belong at this prestigious academy?" the professor asked coldly. Craig met his gaze. "I earned my place here, same as anyone else." A Prilorian student jumped up. "Humans are dangerous warmongers who ruin every planet they touch." Craig shot back calmly. "Humans fight only to protect life, unlike Prilorians, who have a history of conquest and domination." The professor cut off the argument, but tension crackled in the air. Later, in the cafeteria, Craig sat alone until Kaid hesitantly joined him, shocking the other Prilorians. "I have misgivings about humans, but I believe you are honorable, Craig," Kaid said. The rest of the aliens continued to avoid Craig like a disease. An announcement blared through the speakers about a punishing wilderness survival course, mandatory for all students. One whiff of the deadly environments described, and many aliens paled, Prilorians most of all. Craig just leaned back confidently. Stakes were high. Failure meant expulsion from the academy. But Craig would prove humans belonged here. He would earn the respect and trust of these aliens, even if it killed him. This was a battle in the war for human acceptance on the galactic stage, and Craig refused to lose. As the date of the dreaded survival course loomed closer, Craig could see Kaid growing more and more uneasy. His tentacles twitched nervously and his color shifted to a sickly gray. Finally, one evening in their dorm room, Kaid confessed his fears. "Craig, I don't know if I can do this," Kaid said, his voice quavering. "We Prilorians, we evolved on a world of plenty, with mild climates and abundant resources. We're not built for extreme environments like some species. I'm afraid I'll fail out there." Craig put a reassuring hand on Kaid's shoulder. "Hey, don't worry. You're tougher than you think. And remember, I'm from Earth. We humans are used to surviving in all sorts of crazy conditions. I can show you some tricks that might help." Kaid hesitated, pride warring with desperation in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'd appreciate that." Over the next few days, Craig put Kaid through a crash course in Earth-style survival training. He demonstrated how to build a basic shelter, find water in seemingly dry areas, and recognize edible plants. Kaid struggled at first, his tentacles ill-suited for some tasks, but gradually gained confidence. When the course began on the bleak, windswept moon, Craig surveyed his assigned team with cautious optimism. Kaid looked nervous but determined. Lux, the Zephian, seemed intelligent but physically fragile, and Tyrus, the other Prilorian, radiated hostility and arrogance. As they ventured into the barren wilderness, the challenges came hard and fast. Howling winds pelted them with dust. Geysers of scalding steam erupted from unstable ground, and strange, vicious predators stalked them from the shadows. Craig fell into the role of leader almost instinctively, his hard-won Earth skills invaluable. He located a defensible cave for shelter, found a buried stream for water, and even managed to take down a fierce, wolf-like creature that attacked their camp, providing much-needed food. Kaid and Lux followed his lead with growing trust and respect, Kaid even using some of the techniques Craig had taught him. But Tyrus continued to sneer and question every decision. Then, disaster struck in the form of a sudden, massive storm. In the chaos of lashing rain and lightning, the team became separated. Craig found himself in a steep, narrow ravine with Lux, watching in horror as water began to pour in from all sides. Lux panicked, but Craig's mind raced, remembering flash floods back on Earth. Using vines and rocks, he improvised a precarious but climbable path up the slick walls, half carrying the injured Zephian to safety. Meanwhile, Kaid and Tyrus had taken shelter in a shallow cave, but a rockfall had blocked the entrance, trapping them. As Tyrus paced and cursed, Kaid focused on Craig's lessons. Using a shard of reflective crystal and some dry moss, he managed to start a small fire, then angled it to send a plume of smoke up through a crack in the rocks. A crude but effective signal. Hours later, battered and exhausted, the team reunited, Craig supporting Lux while Kaid's signal fire guided them in. They'd barely survived, but they had survived. Together, they limped across the finish line with minutes to spare. As word of their harrowing victory spread, Craig found himself the subject of intense scrutiny and debate. Some aliens, like Lux and her Zephian friends, hailed him as a hero, proof that humans had much to offer the galaxy. But many Prilorians took Tyrus's side, accusing Craig of reckless grandstanding. He nearly got Lux killed with that stunt in the ravine, Tyrus loudly complained to a group of nodding Prilorians, and splitting the team, arrogant and irresponsible. Craig tried to defend himself. I did what I had to do to keep us alive out there. But Tyrus cut him off with a sharp gesture. We'd have been fine without you. Kaid was already sending a signal. A signal I only knew how to make because of what Craig taught me, Kaid shot back, stunning Tyrus and the watching crowd. This human saved our lives. More than that, he's shown me the courage and ingenuity of his species. We could learn much from humanity if we set aside our prejudice. Tyrus spluttered and stormed off, but the damage was done. Across campus, the battle lines were drawn between those willing to re-examine their views on humans and those more determined than ever to put Craig in his place. And Craig himself? He knew this was just the beginning. The survival course was only one test among many. To truly prove humanity's worth, he'd have to keep excelling, no matter the odds or the opposition. But as he looked from Kaid's fierce support to Lux's grateful smile, he felt a flicker of hope amid the hostility. Change wouldn't come easily to the Galactic Academy, but maybe, just maybe, he could help build a future where humans and aliens stood together as equals. As the new semester rolled around, Craig found himself eagerly anticipating the Galactic Ecologies class. The prospect of hands-on fieldwork across alien worlds thrilled him, despite the undercurrent of tension that still lingered from last semester's events. Walking into the lecture hall on the first day, Craig overheard snippets of hushed conversations. Did you hear? The humans in this class. Great. Now we have to worry about him contaminating our homeworlds. I heard he almost got students killed during that survival course. Craig pursed his lips, recognizing Tyrus's handiwork in spreading these rumors. He took his seat, determined not to let it get to him. The Prilorian professor strode in, tentacles swaying as he activated the holo display. Welcome, students. Our first field study will take place on Craxus. Craig's ears perked up. He'd read about Craxus, a harsh desert moon with conditions not unlike Earth's Sahara or Atacama. His pulse quickened with anticipation. Glancing around, Craig noticed his classmates' reactions were markedly different. Lux's delicate Zephian features had paled, while other species muttered nervously amongst themselves. Even Kaid looked uneasy. After class, Kaid pulled Craig aside. Craig, I'm worried about this trip. Craxus is brutal, even for Prilorians. The heat, the lack of water, the toxic dust storms. It's going to push everyone to their limits. Craig nodded, understanding his friend's concern. I get it, Kaid, but I've dealt with similar environments back on Earth. How about this? I'll teach you some desert survival tricks I picked up, and you can fill me in on any unique dangers Craxus might throw at us. Deal? Kaid's tentacles wiggled in agreement. Deal. The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. Craig and Kaid spent hours poring over Craxus data, exchanging knowledge and running simulations. As the departure date neared, Craig felt as ready as he could be. Boarding the shuttle, Craig's optimism was cut short by Tyrus and his group. The Prilorian sneered, blocking Craig's path. Well, if it isn't the hairless ape. Come to wreak havoc on another world? Craig met Tyrus's gaze evenly. I'm here to study and learn, same as you. Tyrus scoffed. Please. Humans have no business on alien worlds. You'll probably contaminate the entire ecosystem just by breathing. Actually, Craig replied calmly, humans are uniquely adapted to survive in harsh environments. The very traits you mock might end up being crucial on Craxus. Tyrus's face darkened, but before he could retort, the shuttle's engines roared to life. Craig brushed past him, finding a seat next to Keed as they began their journey to Craxus. The moment they stepped onto Craxus's surface, Craig understood why his classmates had been so apprehensive. The heat hit like a physical force, the air so dry it seemed to suck moisture from their bodies. In the distance, ominous clouds of reddish dust swirled on the horizon. Within hours, the alien students were struggling. Craig watched as Lux stumbled, her Zephian physiology ill-equipped for the intense heat. Without hesitation, he stepped in. Everyone, gather around, Craig called out. We need to find shelter and water fast. See those rock formations? They might have caves we can use as a base camp. Some students grumbled, but as the twin sons of Craxus beat down mercilessly, they fell in line. Craig led them to the rocks, where they indeed found a suitable cave. Using techniques he'd learned on Earth, Craig showed them how to construct solar stills to collect precious water. As night fell and temperatures plummeted, Craig demonstrated how to insulate their sleeping areas using the fine Craxian sand. The aliens watched, a mix of suspicion and growing respect in their eyes. Days passed, and Craig's Earth-honed skills proved invaluable. He taught them to navigate by Craxus's unfamiliar stars, to find hidden water sources, to predict and prepare for the toxic sandstorms that swept across the plains. It was during one such storm that disaster struck. The class had split into smaller groups for a mapping exercise when the sky turned an ominous red. Craig's group, including Kide and Lux, barely made it to a small cave in time. As acidic wind howled outside, Craig sprang into action. Cover your mouths and noses, he instructed, tearing strips from his thermal undersuit. Using the cave's mineral deposits and the limited supplies they carried, he improvised crude but effective breathing masks for everyone. How did you know to do that? Lux asked, her voice muffled behind the mask. Craig shrugged. Similar principle to dealing with volcanic ash back on Earth. The key is to be resourceful with what you have. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find the landscape transformed. Dunes had shifted, landmarks disappeared. But Craig didn't falter. Using skills honed in Earth's deserts, he led them across the treacherous terrain, reuniting with the rest of the class who had feared them lost. Even Tyrus, looking haggard and humbled, couldn't deny Craig's actions had saved lives. As they boarded the shuttle back to the academy, whispers flew among the students. Many were questioning their preconceptions about humans, wondering if perhaps they had more to offer than anyone had realized. Back at the academy, the aftermath of the Craxus expedition sent shockwaves through the student body. A group of Prilorian students confronted the professor in the middle of the quad. You endangered us all by bringing a human, one shouted. He could have gotten us killed. Before the professor could respond, Craig stepped forward. With all due respect, my presence enhanced both the safety and educational value of the trip. The skills I brought from Earth allowed us to overcome challenges that might have otherwise been disastrous. The professor's tentacles rippled in what Craig had learned was a sign of agreement. Precisely. Mr. Craig's unique expertise proved invaluable on Craxus. His inclusion in this class was not a liability, but an asset. Later, in their dorm room, Kide approached Craig. I wanted to thank you, he said, his tentacles twisting in what Craig recognized as embarrassment. Everything you taught us about Craxus, it made a real difference. Craig smiled. Happy to help, and thanks for teaching me about those sulfur geysers. That knowledge came in handy. Keed's color shifted to a warm purple. You know, more Prilorians are talking about humans differently now. After seeing you in action on Craxus, well, let's just say minds are opening. It's a start, right? Craig nodded, feeling a spark of hope. But as he glanced out the window, he caught sight of Tyrus glaring up at their room, his posture rigid with barely contained anger. The battle for acceptance was far from finished. As the new semester approached, Craig found himself drawn to a bulletin board advertising advanced training programs. His eyes locked onto a flyer for an elite survival course on Crixon. The image showed a hellscape of twisted rock formations under bruised skies. Craig's pulse quickened. "You're not seriously considering that, are you?" Keed's voice startled Craig from behind. Craig turned to his friend, noting the concern in Keed's eyes. "I am. Why shouldn't I?" Keed's tentacles writhed anxiously. "Craig, Crixon isn't like anywhere you've been before. It's a death world. The storms there can strip flesh from bone. The predators, their nightmares made real." "Sounds like the ultimate test," Craig said, his voice steady. "I need to know if my Earth skills can hold up anywhere in the galaxy." Keed sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Craig's jaw. "Just be careful, okay?" The first day of the program, Craig stood at attention with a dozen other students. Their instructor, a Prilorian named Vrock, paced before them. His tentacles lashed the air as he spoke. "Welcome to hell," Vrock growled, his gaze fixed on Craig. Well, a human. I didn't think your kind had the stomach for real challenges." Craig met Vrock's eyes without flinching. "I'm here to learn, sir." Vrock sneered. "We'll see how long that lasts." He gestured to the student beside Craig. "Tyrus, I'm surprised to see you here." Craig's head snapped to the side. There stood Tyrus, looking smug. "I couldn't let a human show up the rest of us," Tyrus said. Vrock's tentacles twitched in what might have been amusement. "Good. You two can be partners. Try not to kill each other before Crixon does." Days later, Craig's boots crunched on Crixon's jagged surface. The air tasted like metal and ozone. In the distance, lightning crackled between ominous clouds. "This is your fault," Tyrus snarled, as gale-force winds whipped around them. "If you hadn't insisted on checking those rock formations." "There!" Craig shouted over the rising storm. He pointed to a cave mouth. "We need to get inside now!" They sprinted for shelter as the sky unleashed its fury. Once inside, Craig pulled out a portable analyzer. "The air in here isn't great, but it's better than out there." Tyrus opened his mouth to retort, but a deafening crack cut him off. The cave shuddered. Rocks rained down as the ceiling collapsed. Darkness engulfed them. Craig fumbled for his light, flicking it on to reveal a nightmare. They were trapped in a small pocket, cut off from the entrance. Worse, a noxious green gas seeped from cracks in the walls. "We're dead," Tyrus choked out, his breath coming in panicked gasps. "Not yet," Craig said. He rummaged through his pack, pulling out a sealant gun. "I learned about this in history class. Old Earth miners used to seal off gas pockets." Craig worked quickly, spraying foam into the cracks. The hissing of escaping gas slowed, then stopped. "That buys us time, but we need to dig out," Craig said. Tyrus stared at him. "How?" Craig hefted a plasma cutter from his belt. "We make our own exit." For hours, they took turns cutting and clearing rock. The work was brutal. Sweat poured down Craig's face, stinging his eyes. His muscles screamed in protest. A chittering sound froze them both. "What was that?" Tyrus whispered. The noise came again, closer. Something skittered in the darkness beyond their lights. "Crixonian cave dwellers," Craig said. "Get ready." The creatures burst from the shadows, a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth. Craig's plasma cutter flashed, searing through alien flesh. Tyrus fought beside him, desperation lending strength to his blows. When it was over, Craig sagged against the wall, utterly spent. Blood trickled from a gash on his arm, but a faint breeze touched his face. "We're almost out," he gasped. They emerged onto a landscape transformed by the storm. Their extraction point was gone, the shuttle a twisted wreck. Tyrus's face fell. "Now what?" Craig checked his map. "The emergency beacon is 300 miles that way. We walk." "We'll never make it," Tyrus said. Craig shouldered his pack. We don't have a choice. They set out across Crixon's hostile terrain. Acid rain seared their skin. Hurricanes threatened to tear them from the ground. Monstrous creatures stalked their every step. Through it all, Craig pushed on. He showed Tyrus how to find water in seemingly barren rock, how to predict the storms using subtle signs in the air and ground, how to avoid the attention of apex predators. Tyrus watched Craig with growing respect. How do you keep going? He asked one night as they huddled in the lee of a rock formation. Craig managed a tired smile, stubbornness mostly in hope. As days turned to weeks, their supplies dwindled. The beacon still lay far ahead. Then disaster struck. A pack of Crixonian hunters picked up their trail. Craig saw the choice before him with stark clarity. He turned to Tyrus. I'll draw them off. You make a run for the beacon. That's suicide, Tyrus protested. Maybe, Craig said, but it's our best shot. He clasped Tyrus's shoulder. Good luck. Before Tyrus could argue, Craig took off running. The hunters followed, their howls filling the air. Craig ran until his lungs burned. He fought with every trick he knew, but in the end, it wasn't enough. As claws raked his back, Craig's last thought was of Earth, so far away. He woke to the hum of medical equipment. Keed's worried face swam into view. You made it, Craig croaked. Kyde's tentacles curled in relief. Barely. We almost didn't find you in time. Craig turned his head to see Vrock and Tyrus nearby. Vrock looked chastened. I was wrong about you, human, Vrock said gruffly. What you did out there, I've never seen anything like it. Tyrus stepped forward. I owe you my life, he said quietly. I was wrong about humans, about you. As Craig drifted back to sleep, he heard Keed talking excitedly about the commotion at the academy. Word of Craig's survival had spread like wildfire. Aliens from all over were clamoring to learn about Earth techniques. When Craig finally returned to classes, he found himself the center of attention. Students peppered him with questions about Earth survival skills. Even some Prilorian officials pulled him aside, hinting at a shift in their stance towards humanity. Craig stood taller, feeling the weight of new responsibility. He had opened a door for humanity in the galactic community. Now, he had to make sure it stayed open. Craig stood at the front of the packed auditorium, his eyes scanning the sea of alien faces. Tentacles, antennae, and compound eyes all focused intently on him. The air buzzed with anticipation. Welcome to Deathworld Survival 101, Craig began, his voice carrying to the back of the room. Today we'll start with the basics of resource management in hostile environments. As Craig spoke, holographic images flickered to life behind him, showcasing the harsh landscapes of Crixon. Students leaned forward, captivated by the scenes of swirling acid storms and treacherous terrain. Rule number 1, Craig continued, always assume your gear will fail. Nature is unforgiving, but it's also full of hidden resources if you know where to look. He demonstrated techniques for finding water in seemingly barren rock, fashioning tools from native flora, and predicting weather patterns using subtle environmental cues. The alien students watched in rapt attention, many furiously taking notes. In the back row, Tyrus sat with his arms crossed, his face a mask of forced neutrality, but even he couldn't hide the occasional flicker of interest as Craig delved into advanced survival tactics. After the lecture, Craig found himself surrounded by eager students, their questions coming rapid fire. How do you neutralize Crixonian venom? A Xylaxian asked, waving its tentacles excitedly. What about dealing with gravity fluctuations on unstable moons? Chirped an avian trill. Craig answered each query patiently, drawing on his hard-earned experiences. As the crowd thinned, he noticed Vrock approaching. Impressive seminar, human, Vrock said, his tentacles curling in what Craig now recognized as grudging respect. Your methods, they're unorthodox, but effective. I'd like to discuss incorporating some of these techniques into our standard curriculum. Craig nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. I'd be happy to collaborate, Vrock. There's so much we can learn from each other. As the weeks passed, Craig's schedule grew increasingly hectic. He found himself rushing from lecture halls to practical workshops, demonstrating survival skills for species with wildly different physiologies. One afternoon, as Craig finished a hands-on session on improvised shelter construction, Keed approached him. "Craig, you look exhausted," Keed said, his tentacles rippling with concern. "Maybe it's time to consider bringing in some help?" Craig ran a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "You're right. I can't keep this up alone. But where would we find instructors with the right experience?" Keed's color shifted to a thoughtful blue. "What about reaching out to Earth? Surely there are others like you, humans who've conquered the harshest environments your planet has to offer." The idea took root, and soon Craig found himself sifting through applications from Earth's most seasoned survivalists. Ex-military operators, wilderness experts, and extreme athletes all vied for the chance to share their skills at the Galactic Academy. As the first human instructors arrived, the Academy buzzed with excitement and trepidation. Craig watched with pride as his fellow Earthlings stepped up to the challenge, their rugged grit winning over even the most skeptical alien students. In one of the training rooms, Craig observed as Sarah, a former Arctic explorer, guided a group of heat-sensitive Volcran through cold-weather survival techniques. "Your bodies may not be built for sub-zero temperatures," Sarah explained, "but with the right preparation and knowledge, you can survive and even thrive in frozen environments." The Volcran listened intently, their usual fiery glow dimmed with concentration as they practiced insulation techniques. Meanwhile, in the xenobiology lab, Keed worked alongside human instructors, bridging the gap between Earth survival skills and alien physiology. His unique perspective proved invaluable in adapting human techniques for a variety of species. "By combining your Earth methods with our advanced biotech," Keed explained to a group of mixed species, "we can create survival gear that's more versatile and effective than anything we've had before." As word of the Academy's groundbreaking curriculum spread, delegations from distant worlds began to arrive. Entire alien races, previously dismissive of humanity, now sought to learn from Earth survivors. But not everyone welcomed this shift. In shadowy corners of the Academy, Tyrus gathered like-minded Prilorians, their resentment festering. "We can't let these humans usurp our position," Tyrus hissed to his followers. "It's time we showed the galaxy that Prilorians are the true masters of survival." As the new semester approached, Craig prepared for an advanced training mission to Nexus 7th, a notoriously unstable moon. Unbeknownst to him, Tyrus and his cohorts had set their plan in motion, sabotaging equipment and altering mission parameters. The day of departure arrived. Craig, Keed, and a team of mixed human and alien instructors boarded the shuttle, unaware of the dangers that awaited them on Nexus 7's treacherous surface. Craig stood before the assembled team, his eyes scanning the diverse group of alien students and human instructors. The air in the briefing room crackled with nervous energy. "Sizor Prime," Craig said, activating a holographic display of the rogue moon. "One of the deadliest environments in known space. This mission will push you to your limits." Keed's tentacles rippled with excitement. "We're ready, Craig. Your training has prepared us for this." Craig nodded, unaware of Tyrus lurking at the back of the room, his forged credentials granting him access to the mission. The Prilorian's eyes narrowed as he watched the human speak. Hours later, their ship pierced Sizor Prime's turbulent atmosphere. Lightning struck the hull, rattling the craft. Craig gripped his harness as they plummeted through roiling clouds of toxic gas. "Brace for landing!" the pilot shouted. The ship slammed onto the surface, skidding to a halt. Craig unbuckled, moving to the airlock. He unsealed his helmet, taking a cautious breath of the filtered air. "Looks like the scrubbers are working," he said. "Let's move." They exited into a hellscape. The ground beneath their feet bubbled with pools of molten rock. In the distance, a geyser of superheated plasma erupted, painting the sky an eerie orange. "Stay alert," Craig warned as they began setting up the base camp. "This place will kill you if you let your guard down for even a second." As the team worked, Tyrus and his followers moved through the camp, sabotaging equipment with practiced efficiency. They planted a false beacon, then retreated to watch their plan unfold. An alarm blared from Craig's wrist computer. "Distress signal," he said, frowning at the display. "It's coming from the volcanic zone. Keed, Lux, you're with me. The rest of you secure the camp." They set out across the treacherous terrain, unaware of the trap they were walking into. Tyrus watched them go, a cruel smile playing across his face. Craig led the way, his boots sinking into the unstable ground with each step. They climbed a ridge, the alleged source of the distress call just ahead. "Something's not right," Keed said, his sensory organs twitching. "I'm not detecting any life signs." Before Craig could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered. A massive fissure opened up, spewing noxious fumes. "Back to camp!" Craig shouted. "Now!" They raced across the volatile landscape, narrowly avoiding jets of superheated steam and rivers of molten rock. As they crested the final hill, Craig's heart sank. The camp lay in ruins. Tents were shredded, equipment scattered and broken. And standing amidst the destruction was Tyrus, flanked by a group of armed Prilorians. "Welcome back," Tyrus sneered. "Enjoy your little hike." Craig's mind raced, assessing the situation. They were outnumbered, their gear destroyed or stolen. He raised his hand slowly, attempting to defuse the situation. "Tyrus, what is this? We're on a training mission." "Spare me," Tyrus spat. "We've been watching you humans. Your kind doesn't belong here, contaminating the academy with your primitive ways." Craig's eyes darted to his students, seeing fear and confusion on their faces. He had to get them out of this. "Think about what you're doing," Craig said calmly. "The Galactic Authority." A plasma bolt sizzled past Craig's head, cutting him off. Tyrus leveled his weapon at Craig's chest. "The Authority isn't here," Tyrus growled. "It's just us now, and we're going to show the galaxy what happens to upstart species who don't know their place." Craig's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. They couldn't fight their way out. They couldn't call for help. There was only one choice. "Run!" Craig shouted, diving for cover as plasma fire erupted around them. The team scattered, fleeing into Xizor Prime's deadly wilderness. Craig grabbed Keed and Lux, pulling them behind a rocky outcropping as Tyrus's laughter echoed behind them. "We can't outrun them forever," Lux panted, her avian features contorted with fear. Craig peered out at the hostile landscape before them. Rivers of acid rain cut through fields of razor-sharp crystal formations. In the distance, a pack of six-limbed predators prowled, drawn by the commotion. "We don't have to outrun them forever," Craig said grimly. "We just have to survive long enough to find a way off this rock." With that, they plunged into the depths of Xizor Prime's unforgiving terrain, the sounds of pursuit nipping at their heels. The extraction site loomed ahead, a jagged outcropping of rock jutting from Xizor Prime's volatile surface. Craig's team scrambled towards it, hope rising in their chests. Suddenly a whistling sound cut through the air. "Get down!" Zelos shouted, his voice raw with urgency. Craig dove, pulling Lux down with him as plasma bolts seared the air above their heads. The ground shook as artillery fire rained down, kicking up clouds of acrid dust. "Ambush!" Craig yelled, his eyes scanning the rocky terrain. He spotted Tyrus's forces, their weapons glinting in the eerie light of the lava flows. The team scattered, diving behind whatever cover they could find. Craig pressed his back against a twisted mass of alien metal, his breath coming in short gasps. He glanced to his left, seeing the fear etched on his students' faces. "Cade!" Craig called out, searching for his friend. His heart sank as he saw Cade pinned down by sniper fire, separated from the group by a field of burning debris. Craig's mind raced. They were outgunned and outnumbered. He looked at the alien settlement nearby, an idea forming. "Listen up!" Craig shouted over the din of battle. "I need you to get the injured to the extraction point. I'll draw their fire." "But sir," one of the students protested. "No arguments," Craig cut him off. "This is what we trained for. Now go." Craig sprinted towards the settlement, plasma bolts nipping at his heels. He burst into a dilapidated structure, his eyes quickly adjusting to the gloom. Scattered around were remnants of alien technology and discarded gear. Working feverishly, Craig cobbled together makeshift explosives and incendiary devices. He muttered a quick prayer to whatever cosmic force might be listening and charged back into the fray. Craig hurled his homemade bombs with pinpoint accuracy. The first struck a cluster of Tyrus's men, sending them flying. The second ignited a fuel cache, creating a wall of fire that cut off their advance. In the chaos, Craig saw his students and Zelos making a break for the extraction point. He allowed himself a moment of relief before turning back to the battle. Suddenly, the ground beneath Craig's feet began to tremble. He watched in horror as Tyrus, his face contorted with rage, activated some kind of device. The earth split open, rivers of molten rock surging forth. Craig found himself cut off, a sea of lava separating him from his team. On the other side of the fiery divide stood Tyrus, his Prylorian features twisted into a snarl. "Just you and me now, human," Tyrus spat. Craig squared his shoulders, years of survival training kicking in. "Let's finish this," he growled. They clashed in a brutal dance of violence. Tyrus unleashed bursts of Prylorian energy, each blast narrowly missing Craig as he ducked and weaved. Craig retaliated with every dirty trick and survival skill he'd learned on Earth's harshest terrain. For a moment, Craig gained the upper hand, landing a solid blow that sent Tyrus staggering. But the Prylorian recovered quickly, lunging at Craig with inhuman speed. They grappled at the edge of a lava flow, the heat searing their skin. Tyrus, his eyes wild with hate, tried to force them both into the molten rock. Craig strained against him, feeling his strength beginning to fail. A blast of energy struck Tyrus from behind. The Prylorian's grip loosened, and Craig saw Kaid standing there, his tentacles still crackling with power. Taking advantage of the distraction, Craig struck. A swift series of blows left Tyrus crumpled on the ground, finally subdued. As the sounds of approaching reinforcements filled the air, Craig stumbled towards Kaid. They stood there, battered and exhausted, as Tyrus's remaining forces were rounded up. "I'm sorry," Craig said softly. "I never wanted it to come to this." Kaid's tentacles rippled with emotion. "We had no choice, Craig. They left us no alternative." Craig nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The cost had been high, but they had survived. As he watched his battered students being tended to by the newly arrived medical teams, Craig knew that their ordeal on Zizor Prime had forged bonds that would never be broken. Zelos approached, his expression solemn. "I'm staying here," he said, gesturing to the alien settlement. "These people need help rebuilding." Craig clasped Zelos's hand, feeling a newfound respect for the being. Craig awoke in the sterile medical bay of the Galactic Academy, his body aching from the ordeal on Zizor Prime. The soft hum of medical equipment filled the air as he blinked away the fog of sleep. Beside his bed, Kaid's tentacles twitched with relief. "You're awake," Kaid said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "The doctors weren't sure when you'd come around." Craig tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "How long was I out?" 3 days, Kaid replied. "The Academy's given us all extended leave to recover." Before Craig could respond, a commotion erupted outside the medical bay. Through the transparent walls, he saw a swarm of reporters and camera drones, all clamoring for a glimpse of the human hero. "They've been here since news of Zizor Prime broke," Kaid explained. "The whole galaxy wants to hear your story." Craig sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention." Days passed, and the media frenzy only intensified. Craig found himself besieged by interview requests from every corner of the galaxy. Eventually, at the urging of Academy officials, he agreed to a select few. Craig sat in front of a hollow camera, the lights hot on his face. The Centaurian interviewer leaned forward, her compound eyes gleaming with excitement. "Craig, your actions on Zizor Prime have captivated billions. What do you say to those who see you as a symbol of human resilience?" Craig paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm no symbol. I'm just a survivor, like countless others on Earth. What happened on Zizor Prime wasn't about human superiority. It was about cooperation. humans, Prilorians, and others working together to overcome extremism. The interview continued with Craig passionately advocating for unity and mutual understanding. As the cameras rolled, he spoke of the common ground all species shared, the desire for peace, for progress, for a future free from hatred. His words spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Hollow feeds on 1,000 worlds played clips of Craig's impassioned plea for cooperation. Message boards and social networks exploded with discussion, with moderates from countless species voicing their support. In the midst of this galactic dialogue, a message arrived from an unexpected source. Craig read it with a mixture of surprise and trepidation. "The Prilorian High Council requests your presence on Prylar Prime," he told Kaid. "They want to formally commend us and discuss potential exchange programs with Earth." Kaid's tentacles writhed with concern. "After everything that's happened, is it safe?" Craig nodded grimly. "We have to try. It's our best chance to start healing this rift." Weeks later, Craig found himself aboard a sleek diplomatic vessel, accompanied by Kaid and a delegation of Earth's finest military and political minds. As they descended through Prylar Prime's atmosphere, the capital city came into view, and with it, scenes of utter chaos. Pillars of smoke rose from burning buildings. In the streets below, rioters clashed with security forces. Explosions rocked the cityscape as pockets of extremists waged guerrilla warfare against their own people. "What the hell?" one of the Earth delegates gasped. "I thought this was supposed to be a peaceful summit." Craig's eyes sharp as he surveyed the upheaval. "Looks like Tyrus's actions have had far-reaching consequences. Stay alert, everyone." Their convoy pushed through the chaos, armored vehicles flanking them on all sides. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the street. Craig's battle-honed instincts kicked in as he shouted, "Everybody down!" Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as snipers opened fire from nearby rooftops. Through the shattered windows, Craig saw figures in dark clothing rushing towards them, explosive devices strapped to their chests. "Out of the vehicle now!" Craig roared, kicking open the door and dragging the nearest delegate to safety. He pushed them behind a nearby barricade, his eyes scanning for threats. All around them, the street had erupted into a war zone. Craig's mind raced, assessing the situation with cold precision. He spotted an injured Prilorian soldier nearby, his weapon lying just out of reach. Craig darted from cover, plasma bolts scorching the ground at his feet. He snatched up the fallen weapon, rolled behind a burning vehicle, and returned fire. His shots found their mark, dropping two of the advancing suicide bombers. "Kaid!" Craig shouted over the din of battle. "Get the wounded to that building, I'll cover you!" As Kaid led the injured delegates to safety, Craig provided suppressing fire. His Earth survival training meshed seamlessly with the combat techniques he'd learned at the academy. He moved from cover to cover, each shot precise and devastating. But the attackers kept coming. Craig's stolen weapon began to overheat, the charge depleting rapidly. He gritted his teeth, preparing for a last stand. Suddenly, the whine of approaching aircraft filled the air. Craig looked up to see Prilorian assault shuttles descending on the battlefield. Elite troops repelled into the fray, their weapons cutting down the extremists with surgical precision. Leading the charge was a familiar face, Vrock, the hardline instructor from Crixon. The Prilorian's eyes locked with Craig's as he approached. "Looks like you could use a hand, human," Vrock said, a newfound respect in his voice. Craig nodded, relief flooding through him. "Glad to see you, Vrock, but I thought you were—" "A hardliner?" Vrock finished. "I was, but after seeing what you did on Zizor Prime, how could I not change? My team and I couldn't stand by while extremists tore our world apart." With Vrock's forces providing cover, Craig turned his attention to evacuation. He led the Earth delegation through the war-torn streets, his voice calm and steady as he directed them through the chaos. "Keep low, move fast," Craig instructed as they darted between burning vehicles. "Kaid, watch our six. Vrock, any chance of air support?" Vrock nodded, barking orders into his comm unit. Moments later, Prilorian gunships roared overhead, their weapons systems keeping the extremists at bay. They fought their way through ambush after ambush. Craig's quick thinking and adaptability proved invaluable as they navigated the urban battlefield. He improvised armor from debris, coordinated with Vrock's troops, and even managed to hijack an enemy transport to ferry wounded diplomats to safety. Hours later, as the last of the Earth delegation boarded evacuation shuttles, Craig finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He watched as Prylorian security forces moved through the city, rounding up the last pockets of resistance. Vrock approached, his expression grim. The summit will have to be postponed, of course. But know this, human. What you've done here today will not be forgotten. Craig nodded, exhaustion etched on his face. This is just the beginning, Vrock. We've got a long road ahead if we want to build a real, lasting peace. As Craig boarded the shuttle back to the academy, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The battle had been won, but the true war, the fight against hatred and extremism, was just beginning. And for the first time, Craig truly believed it was a fight they could win. The Galactic Academy's sleek corridors felt cold and alien to Craig as he trudged back to his quarters. His footsteps echoed hollowly, a stark contrast to the jubilant crowds that had greeted him upon arrival. Craig punched in his access code, the door sliding open with a soft hiss. He stood in the darkness of his room, the events on Prylor Prime replaying in his mind. The acrid smell of burning buildings, the screams of the injured, the sight of mangled bodies strewn across the streets. It all came rushing back. Craig's hand trembled as he reached for the light switch. Days blurred together as Craig sequestered himself in his quarters. The incessant chiming of his comm unit grated on his nerves. Another interview request, another accolade to be bestowed. He silenced it with a vicious swipe. A gentle knock at the door broke the silence. Craig? Keed's muffled voice came through. You missed another class. Professor Xanthor is worried. Craig didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the holoscreen before him. News reports from across the galaxy scrolled by, each one more disheartening than the last. Prylorian leaders, their faces plastered across the screen, spouted empty platitudes about unity while downplaying the extent of the supremacist threat. It's all lies, Craig muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse. He shut off the holoscreen, plunging the room back into darkness. Weeks passed, and Craig's absence from classes became the norm. He avoided the concerned glances of his alien classmates, brushing past Lux in the hallway without a word. Keed cornered him one day in the Academy's Arboretum, Craig's usual refuge. This has to stop, Keed said, his tentacles writhing with worry. Don't let their hatred poison you. We can still make a difference, still foster unity. Craig laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. Unity? Open your eyes, Keed. It was all a fantasy. The galaxy will never change. Hatred and conflict are all there is. Before Keed could respond, their comm units buzzed simultaneously. Emergency alerts flashed across the screens. Reports of devastating terrorist attacks on multiple worlds. The death toll climbed by the minute. Craig's fists clenched as he read the details. The attacks bore the hallmarks of Tyrus's former allies, a clear attempt to shatter any hope of peace between humans and Prylorians. That night, Craig vanished from the academy without a trace. Panic spread through the faculty and student body as weeks passed with no word from the human hero. Cade searched tirelessly, following every lead, until finally. The safe house was nestled deep in an asteroid belt, shielded from prying eyes. Keed's ship docked with a clang, and he made his way through the airlock. The sight that greeted him stopped him cold. Craig stood at the center of a group of hardened human warriors, their faces etched with the scars of 100 battles. Maps and weapon schematics covered the walls. In Craig's eyes, Keed saw a cold fury that sent a shiver through his tentacles. "What is this?" Keed asked, though he already knew the answer. Craig's voice was steel. "This is how we end it. No more diplomacy, no more olive branches. We hunt them down, every last supremacist cell, and we wipe them out." Keed pleaded with his friend, his voice breaking. Craig, please. This isn't the way. We've made progress. We can't throw it all away. Progress? Craig spat the word. While we played nice, they were planning mass murder. No more. We fight fire with fire now. Keed saw the unshakable dedication in Craig's eyes and knew further argument was futile. With a heavy heart, he made a decision. Then let me help you one last time. Cade introduced Craig to his network of Prilorian dissidents, those who had grown weary of their leaders in action. They provided Craig's team with invaluable intelligence and supply caches. As Craig prepared to embark on his first mission, Cade stood with him at the airlock. The two friends embraced, the gesture bittersweet with the weight of all that had changed. Be careful out there, Cade said softly. Craig nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars beyond. We'll be back, and we'll bring justice with us. The airlock hissed shut, and Keed watched as Craig's ship disappeared into the void, bound for a quarantined moon and the supremacist cell that awaited them there. Keed's tentacles drooped as he turned away, hoping against hope that his friend would find his way back, not just to the academy, but to the ideals that had once burned so brightly within him.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.